Assalamu alaikum, sisters, and welcome to week 2 of the Prophetic Formula. As Sister Haneen explained last week, there are 4 sections to this programme. Last week we covered Taharah and Tazkiya, the purification of our outer and inner selves, removing the evil from ourselves and cleansing the dirt so that we can adopt noble attributes and beautify our hearts. Now, with all of these good, noble actions like wudu, ghusl, tazkiyatun nafs, or any act for that matter, there is a very important component that must be sound, must be perfected, and must be sincere and pure for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for any of it to be accepted and worthy. And that is what this week's topic is, inshallah, our niyyah, our intention. Now, every act without the correct intention, without the sincerity for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, becomes a habit, just becomes an empty vessel of movement, void of the connection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But every act, even if it's a small habit, with the correct intention and sincerity for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes worship. Now, I want you to imagine on the Day of Judgment, standing there and you receive your book of deeds. And we might initially think of finding the prescribed acts of worship, inshallah. You know, our prayers and our fasts, all of that will be written, inshallah. But imagine your daily, general, common acts, like you're traveling, you're cooking, you're working, you're learning. All of that being included in this record of good deeds as acts of worship. Now, the way to make this happen is to perfect your intention and make it sincere for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It has the ability to change your daily common life to a life of worship. Now, every act has 2 dimensions. The first is al-hayatul asaliya and the second is al-hayatul amaliya. So the first is the internal hidden dimension of an act, the real force and motivation behind an act, the niyyah, the intention. And the second, al-hayatul amaliya, is the external dimension of that act, so the physical form of that act. Now, when you reflect upon your daily actions, you shouldn't just reflect upon it in one dimension. You shouldn't just focus on the physical action, the external manifestation, but also consider the internal motivation behind that act. For if you have a sincere intention of doing these acts for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then these daily acts, these seemingly low-grade common tasks, chores and habits, all of that can become a form of worship. It can transform your whole life into a state of worship. And does it take any effort to make an intention? The answer is no. It doesn't take as much time to make an intention as it does to do the act, for example. The niyyah is the thought behind it. It doesn't take the same amount of effort or exertion. For example, imagine you're going to meet with someone. You're either going to host someone in your home or you're going to travel to meet someone. And we do this all the time. You know, sometimes we meet with our friends just as a pastime, for lunch, for dinner, for an event or an activity. And you plan your day, you get in your car, you travel to see this person, you spend time with this person. Now imagine, your intention is to meet up with this person just to pass some time. Did that take any time? Comparatively, no. Now, it might have taken hours out of your day to travel, to get ready to meet that person, to travel to meet that person, to then spend time with that person. But the thought behind all of that, to do all of that, happens in an instant. Sometimes it's so quick and natural to us that we don't even notice that we are making the intention. Now, if that intention remains void of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it just remains as a basic action. You met with someone, you talked with someone, you travelled for someone, but imagine if that thought, that niyyah, was for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, imagine your friend is going through some hardship, some problem, and you intend that you'll meet with this person to ease their burden. Or imagine that you're going to meet a person of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a righteous scholar, and you intend to sit in their company. Now, that simple change in intention will transform that action into worship. And our good deeds don't need to be just limited to the prescribed acts of worship. As I mentioned before, your whole life can become a form of worship with the correct intention. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Nisa, verse number 100, those who leave their homes and die while emigrating to Allah and His Messenger, their reward has already been secured with Allah. Now, let me say that again. Those who leave their homes, so they have already left with the intention of emigrating to Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and they die while emigrating, so they didn't actually complete the action, their reward has already been secured with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, how can this be? They didn't actually do the act, but still gain the reward. And this is because although the act appears externally incomplete, the hidden aspect, the real force, the real motivation, the real intention was sound and pure for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is that intention that secured the reward. Regardless of whether the physical act was complete or not, the reward was still secured. And this illustrates the true importance of our intentions. So within these two dimensions of our actions, the Niyyah and the Aml, if you have a sincere intention but are unable to complete the action, you can still be rewarded. Now there is a famous hadith reported by Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu that says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Verily, deeds are only with intentions. So the reward of any deed depends on the niyyah, not upon the external completion. Sometimes the amal is good, but the niyyah is bad. So for example, you could be praying and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the niyyah is to show off for those around you. It's not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it doesn't matter if you stand the whole night in prayer if there is no sincerity in your intention. Even if your wudu has been completed and performed properly, and your external dress code is correct, your order of praying is correct, your recitation is accurate, it doesn't matter if the niyyah to perform that prayer is corrupt. Now, there is a hadith in Sahih Muslim, and the reference is on the screen, and I'll be just paraphrasing the hadith and telling you the story behind it, because it illustrates again the importance of niyyah and its impact on our akhira. So the hadith explains that the first of men to be called to account on the day of judgment will be a man who died as a martyr. And he will be brought before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make him recount his blessings. And he will accept the blessings that he was given and accept that he enjoyed them. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask him, what he did in response to these blessings. And he will say, I fought for your cause. I worked hard and I fought battles and put myself in dangerous situations to the point that I had to give the ultimate sacrifice, my life for you. Again, I'm paraphrasing. And what was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's response? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, you have told a lie. You fought so that people would call you a brave warrior, and people did. You got that in the dunya, so people saw you as a brave warrior. And then the order will be given to drag him to the hellfire. Then the scholar will come forward, and he will explain that he spent, his life learning and teaching Islam, and he recited the Quran for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call him a liar. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that he did all of that to be called a scholar or to be called a qari. And he got that in the dunya. So again, orders will be passed for this man to be taken to hell. And then comes the charitable man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided him with wealth and abundance, and he will explain that he spent in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call him a liar and reveal that he only did those acts so that he may be called a generous man. And he got that in the dunya. And again, he will be ordered to be taken to the fires of hell. Now, subhanAllah, this is a very scary hadith to reflect upon, because regardless of their apparent good deeds and their pious outward nature, they will be thrown into the fires of hell. Their corrupted intention, their material intention, their impure intention will lead them to the hellfire. So the quality of your niyyah has the ability to render all of your deeds, all of your worship, your prayers, your fasting, your hajj, your umrah, your charity, your working, your learning, your habits, behavior, all of that, either useful or useless on the Day of Judgment. When your niyyah is attached to the dunya, then it is like the dunya itself. It's low and it's meaningless. And this will become a source of punishment for you. But if your niyyah is attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His pleasure, then it becomes worthy and meaningful. And it will become a source of salvation for you, inshallah. Our niyyah, like we have mentioned before, is something hidden. We do not know what someone's intention is. You can hide your intentions from me. I can hide my intentions from you. We can hide it from everyone around us. But nothing is hidden on the Day of Judgment. There is no grey area. Black is black, white is white, right is right, and wrong is wrong. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring clarity to your thoughts and actions, because there is no lying, no deceiving or hiding in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how do we avoid this? How do we avoid getting to the Day of Judgment and finding that all of our deeds, the work that we put in, is of no use? The way to avoid that is to make sure that you have a pure and sincere intention. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Whoever intended to perform a good deed but did not do it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala writes it down with himself as a complete good deed." And the hadith continues by explaining that if you have a pure and sincere intention to do an act and you perform it, that good act, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala multiplies that reward by a minimum of 10 good deeds, and this could go up to 700 or even more. SubhanAllah, this hadith is also a beautiful example of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. You know, we are rewarded by just having a pure and sincere intention alone. And then if we perform that act, our reward is multiplied. And on top of that, if we intended to do a bad deed and didn't do it, it's recorded as a good deed. And if we intended to perform a bad deed and we perform that bad deed, it's only recorded as one single evil deed. The good is easier to attain and multiplied, and the bad is distanced from us and kept to a minimum. So we know that a pure and sincere intention coupled with an action gives us our deed, our amal, for example. And we know that amal, because of that pure and sincere intention, gives us reward. And we have also learned that that intention, even if you don't get to complete the action, can also give us reward. But the action on its own, or if it's with a corrupt intention, does not give you reward. So the most important thing and part of this equation is the niyyah. And it is the determining factor of whether our lives are useful or useless. A pure, sincere intention, inshallah. Now, inshallah, in the following slides, we will be discussing what are the different types of intention and how to ensure that our intentions are pure and sincere. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome to the second part of today's session on Niyyah, which is the second stage of our prophetic formula. Aisha has introduced to us the concept of Niyyah as well as the importance. but we will now be focusing on the different categories of our intentions and potential attacks that shaitan and our nafs can attempt on our niyyah and how to protect ourselves from it. So what's fundamental to understand and is very easy to understand is that the beginning of evil is not the action or the poor action or the evil action. It is the bad intention that leads to that. And the same thing is with the beginning of good is through a good action. Sorry, a good intention. So these intentions is what leads to our deeds, and our deeds are what determine our ranks. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An'am, verse number 132, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَلِكُلٍّ دَرَجَاتٌ مِّمَّا عَمِلُوا وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِغَافِلٍ عَمَّا يَعْمَلُونَ. They will each be assigned ranks according to their deeds, and your Lord is not unaware of what they do. So, like Aisha mentioned, deeds are impacted by the niyyah. So our ranks on the Day of Judgment will directly be impacted by our intentions as well. So the first initial stage before a deed is the intention. So the intention will directly impact what will happen to us on the Day of Judgment. So the purity in nature of that intention makes a massive difference on the outcome of our deeds in the eyes of Allah. So this is why we need to know the different types of intention and what impact that can have in our deed. So the types of intention can be categorized into 3 types, and the level of purity of that intention is what determines these types or this categorization. So the first type is niyyatu safiya or khalisa, a khalis niyyat, which is a completely pure intention that is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is untainted by any other objective or external material goal. The goal and the ultimate intention is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is the ultimate intention that we want to have in every aspect of our life. That is the ultimate goal. The next category or stage is Niyyat al-Mumtazija, which is probably the most common intention that we have as Muslims, is a mixed intention. So this is a type of intention that is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there is added elements in there that might be for some other ulterior motive, maybe to impress someone, maybe to maybe out of fear of something else, maybe we're doing a good deed but we're scared of what people will think. So that impacts our intention, and it's not purely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is probably the most common intention that we have. And then finally we have niyatul qadira, which is the wrong or impure intention, which is the intention that is completely not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is completely away from Allah, against the commandments or the guidelines of the deen and sharia. So this does not necessarily mean that Niyatul Qadira is only for bad actions. It can be a bad intention but outwardly look like a good action, but a bad intention can turn a good action into a sin as well. So we will look at different examples of each of these types, understand them further, and look at examples in the past from awliya and sahaba, and also look at examples in our own daily lives and how we can convert Niyat al-Qadira or Niyat al-Mumtazaja into Khalis or Safiya Niyat. So when we look at the ultimate standard or goal for our Niyyah, which is Niyat al-Safiya, one of the best exemplars or models or example is of Sayyidah Fatima Zahra radiallahu ta'ala anha, about whom in Surah Al-Insan, verse number 8, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ويطعمون الطعام على حبه, and give food, they give food despite their desire for it. To who? مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا, to the poor, the orphan and the captive. إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله, and they say to themselves, we feed you only for the sake of Allah. لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا, seeking neither reward nor thanks from you. So it is very clear here what the intention of Sayyidah Fatima Zahra was in this situation. But what is the situation? The sabab al-nuzul for this specific ayah, the reason of revelation for this ayah, is Sayyidah Fatima Zahra radiallahu ta'ala anha was looking after Sayyidina Imam Hassan and Hussein, and they were very unwell when they were children, and she did dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and says, oh Allah, give them shafa, if when they get shafa, we will all as a family fast for 3 days. So the first day of the fast, they had bread and they had dates for the iftar, and it was just iftar time when somebody knocked on the door, and it was a faqir, it was a miskeen, somebody who was poor and could not afford food, was at the door and was asking for food. Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, without any hesitation, absolutely no hesitation, gave the bread and the dates. So that night, the whole family broke their fast with just water. Then the next day, they sat down again for iftar, and then again somebody knocked at the door, and it was an orphan asking for the same thing, asking for some food. Again, Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra did the same thing. And then the third day, this repeated again, and they gave their food to a person at the door asking for some food. It was a captive, and again they opened their fast with just water. And this was a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra to see the level of their niyyah and their khulus with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's also a standard for us, and has been clearly mentioned in the Quran, that their intention was that we feed you only for the sake of Allah, seeking neither reward nor thanks from you. So it's not only just for Allah, but it's also devoid and pure of any other expectation from this world. So, for example, when we do things in our lives, we might do something for Allah, we might do a good deed, we might look after someone, but we always have some sort of expectation, which is what corrupts that intention or taints it. We expect that thanks, we expect that appreciation. We're not doing it purely for the sake of Allah. That aspect is there, but this part of seeking neither reward nor thanks, that is what we probably all need to work on. But this is the standard of what a niyyah al-Safiya should be, from Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra radiallahu ta'ala anha's own example. And when you do not have that expectation, you don't have this desire for anything else but Allah, there is no gham, there is no worry, there is no complaints, there is no disappointment, because there was no expectation in the first place. So having this niyyah not only sets this standard that leads to jaza, leads to that action being accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, but and also gives us thawab, gives us reward, but it also leads to this state of satisfaction in our hearts and contentment that no matter what the outcome is of what we do, it will never disappoint us, because we never did it for an outcome. We only did it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whether that thing works out or not, whether somebody appreciates us or not, whether we get that thank you or not, whether somebody does the same back for us or not, and whether somebody in response treats us badly, it doesn't matter, because it wasn't our expectation in the first place. And this is the lesson that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra radiallahu anha gives us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us through this ayah. So another example of Niyyat al-Safiya, or actually an example to illustrate the effect of Niyyat al-Safiya and what it leads you to, and the satisfaction in your heart that it leads to, is the story of Hazrat Nun al-Misri rahimahullah and who he met during Hajj at one point. So Hazrat Nun al-Misri was performing Hajj, and he saw a man who was in the state of ma'rifah. So what is ma'rifah? Ma'rifah is an elevated spiritual state where one recognizes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and most awliya have this state. So how did Hazrat Nun al-Misri recognize this person? Of course, he was at that elevated spiritual status himself. So of course, awliya can recognize other awliya. And he saw this arif, and of course, spiritually, he was in a very elevated high status. But physically, he seemed to be in a state of extreme poverty and seemed very poorly. So Hazrat Nun al-Misri went to him quietly and placed 100 dinar in his hand, so that nobody would see, but just secretively gave it to him. And the man pushed it away and rejected it. So Hazrat Nun al-Misri came back and whispered in his ear, "Oh Arif, why are you rejecting my gift? I'm giving it to you with sidq and ikhlas. I'm giving it to you with honesty and sincerity." And the man said, "This material dirham is from this temporary materialistic world, whereas the state that I am in and what I have right now is from the eternal world, from the eternal creator and master. Why would I exchange this for that?" And he said that this contentment I have, you could place the entirety of Jannah or paradise in front of me, but I would not exchange it for this, for what the state that Allah has given me, the state that Allah has put me in. So this satisfaction of doing something for Allah, and whatever Allah puts you in, whatever situation that Allah puts you in, for you that is enough. So this is the consequence of having niyat al-safiya. You're in a constant state of shukr, and that shukr leads to eventually, inshallah, ma'rifah. So having this niyat al-safiya in every aspect of our lives, not only of course gives us ajr, of course gives us thawab, of course will allow us and make the journey to Jannah more easy for us, inshallah, but also it removes this dissatisfaction or discontentment in our hearts. It removes the gham, the worries, the complaints, the disappointment from having expectations in this world from people. And then you're always just grateful no matter what state you're in, and you're constantly living in a state of shukr. So this is the result of Niyat al-Safiya. So for the next category, what happens when that purity of Niyat al-Safiya is compromised, it is corrupted, or it is tainted by something that is other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? A good example or a story that illustrates this, metaphorically of course, is the story of Sayyidah Rabi al-Basri. And Hazrat Imam al-Rifai narrates that Sayyidah Rabi al-Basri radiallahu anha was traveling on a journey to go to Hajj, and she was very renowned amongst in her time for being a waliya and being very connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a man came and said and proclaimed his love for her while she was traveling, and she said, actually, I have a sister who is a lot more beautiful than me. And immediately, as soon as she said that, the man turned around to look for that sister. And as soon as he said that, she slapped him and said, "Oh liar, you claiming to love me, but you're looking at another's beauty." So of course this is a metaphor here, and she proceeds to say that if you're like this with me, then what is your relationship with your Lord? So here they're talking about raghba, that you might have this love present for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or your beloved, which is of course ultimately supposed to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his Rasul. But we always have this inclination present for anything else. As soon as a worldly thing or some distraction comes in front of us, we will immediately turn towards it. And that corrupts and taints and pollutes that niyat al-safiya, and it makes it into niyat mumtazija. So she gave that man a lesson to say that you cannot claim to have this pure love while as soon as something else is offered, you're inclined towards it. So you can't have this pure niyat al-safiya whilst having a raghba or a possibility of raghba to other things. Which is why what we mentioned in the previous session in week 1 about Tazkiya and Taharah, removing anything that could possibly inculcate or have this possibility of inclination to anything needs to be the most important first stage. If you remove anything that can distract you or can build this inclination in you that can corrupt not only like your intention, but your environment, your sohbah, your habits, everything. If those distractions are removed, the likelihood for your niyyah to be corrupted lessens because that distraction is not in front of you. So that's why the tazkiyah stage is very, very important before you have this niyyah. So this example of say the Rabi Basriya is just to demonstrate that despite the inclination towards good, evil can still exist if the intention is not purely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the most common intention that we probably have in our daily lives. We probably do many good things, we give charity, but we want people to know that we're giving charity. We we help a friend out, we help someone in our family out, but we afterwards say to that person, I helped you at this time, why are you not doing anything for me? There's many things that we do with an expectation, and those actions we do because for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, but when that expectation for recognition, for appreciation, for a reward, for something, expecting something back, expecting that person to treat you back the same way, all those things come in our hearts, that is corrupting our intention. Mumtazija. That's what this niyyat is. And that's the difference between niyyat al-safiya and niyyat al-mumtazija. The result and the conclusion of this niyyah is that it leads to dissatisfaction, it leads to disappointment, to worries, to complaints. The state of whatever you do is always for a desired worldly result, and when that doesn't happen or doesn't go the way you expected it to, of course that's going to lead to some sort of gham, disappointment that wouldn't have occurred if we had the Niyyah Safiya in the first place. The course of action would be the same, your action would be the same, the result might be the same, but your feelings and the state of your heart afterwards will change just by you changing that attention in the beginning and removing any sort of inclination to anything else right at the beginning. And finally, we have the negative or fully evil intention, which is a consequence of when we have Niyat Mumtazija in every aspect of our life and it keeps on getting corrupted or polluted by external things. The end goal, or the end result and the conclusion of that, it leads to Niyat al-Qadira. If we don't reform those Niyat, that Niyat al-Mumtazija that we have at the moment, if we don't reform that and turn it into Niyat al-Safiya, the other the only other possibility it will lead to is Niyat al-Qadira. So many examples exist in our lives. For example, we have showing off, hurting others, acting out of jealousy, lying, seeking material gain, love of the dunya, heedlessness, hatred, laziness, greed, hopelessness. These are all spiritual diseases as well, but a lot of these niyas can manifest in positive actions outwardly. It might seem like that person is doing really, really good. They're doing so many good deeds. They're giving so much charity. But if their niyyah is to show off, then that action, the ajr of that action is turned instead into sin because the niyyah was showing off. If you are acting out of jealousy, you might be outwardly doing something to appease one person in one side, but you might be hurting someone on the other side. But to that one person you're appeasing, it might seem like you're doing something really good. Same with love of the dunya or heedlessness, being careless about something. You think that it's okay, that doesn't matter. It's okay if I don't read the sunnah. If I miss this prayer, it's okay, I'll qada it later. That's heedlessness. And that's a negative intention. It's not just you, of course, you're missing your responsibility. That is a separate problem and sin, but you also have that heedlessness. So that thought you had that it's okay, it doesn't matter, it's fine, I'll just think about it later, or it's not that important. That thought or that intention to actively miss something and you think it's not important and you're heedless about it is also Niyat al-Qadira. So many of these things outwardly might not seem like a problem, might seem like they're very good deeds or somebody's doing a lot, but it might actually be a Niyat al-Qadira. So that first initial stage of defining your intentions before you do something is so important because it determines the outcome of what you do in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And another thing is, on the other side, you might see something or someone doing so much and that doing so many good things. It might be, praying so much, doing so much sadaqah, doing so much, and it might make you feel like I'm not enough in the eyes of Allah. Maybe I'm not doing enough, or you might feel this sort of inferiority or disappointment or insecurity that you're not doing enough. But just know that it's your niyyah that defines that. That niyyah leads to your khulus, your sincerity. It's not the outward result that determines the value of something, or how much someone is doing, or how much sadaqah someone is doing, or how much nawafil someone is reading. It is that niyyah to what determines the action that defines the value of that action. So if we can reform our niyyahs, our intentions, it can not only transform our existing day-to-day life into ibadah, but also remove this disappointment in our hearts and make us stay and live in a constant state of shukr. So self-reflection is very, very important for doing this. So let's look at some day-to-day examples of how these different types of niyyahs can manifest. So on the left side here we have praying, giving charity, and recitation of the Quran. These are, of course, amal salih, good deeds, righteous acts. Yeah, but if we have a bad intention, it can affect the ajr of these acts. If you're praying in the mosque excessively in front of people, when somebody comes, you start reading extra nafil because you're worried about what people might think and you want to show that, oh, I pray a lot. That is showing off. That is changed the ajr of that action. That is now Niyat al-Qadira. If you're giving to charity to show off, it's the same thing. Again, if you're reciting Quran to show people that, oh, mashallah, I'm so connected to the Quran, or to show people that I'm super religious, or to get this elevated status in the community that people respect you more because you're just connected to the Quran, that can change that deed, that action, because of your niyyah. And the thing is that if you have that good intention while doing these actions, and you do read extra at home and in front of people regardless, you do give charity regardless, you recite Quran, you're connected to the Quran regardless of an expectation or outcome, you're still going to get that elevated status, the respect in the community, the worldly benefits that come from these things. But you're also going to get the ajr because you did not have that negative niyyah. So having that positive niyyah at the beginning not only gives you the ajr for that deed, but also will give you the barakah in this dunya as well. But if you have the negative niyyah, you will not get the ajr, and it will taint the barakah you could get in this dunya as well. And on the other hand, we have these normal actions that we do day to day, maybe seem meaningless, like sleeping, cutting your prayer short, staying home instead of the mosque. Things that you might think, actually, they might make me disconnected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you have the correct intention, these actions can become ibadah. How? So for sleeping, for example, you can intend that I want to sleep on time, have a good rest at night, be able to wake up for Fajr so that I can be fully rested, spend my day and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fulfill my responsibilities in this dunya, look after my family, which is the hukm from Allah, make sure that I have enough energy to be present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during my prayers, wake up for Fajr on time. If I'm well rested, it means I can pray on time, I can fulfill my responsibilities on time, and I can serve the deen properly. So resting with the intention that if I am rested and look after this body that Allah has given me so that I can serve His deen, so that I can serve Him, because that's what Allah has ordained me to do, and that's what makes Allah happy, then that 8 hours you sleep, the full 8 hours, become ibadah. If you, for example, are a mother and you're praying and your child is crying or the child is in danger, but you're still trying really hard to pray on time, but you have to cut your prayer short, miss your nawafil, miss your sunnahs because of your child, that again is ibadah because you're still consciously trying to pray, but you're also looking after your children, regardless of you cutting your prayer short. If you have that niyyah that, I want to make sure I pray on time, but I also want to look after my children, So another one is staying home instead of the mosque. Same thing for your children. If you have somebody you're looking after, for example, you might be a caterer for somebody that's unwell. Somebody in your family might be unwell. You might not be physically able to go to the mosque, but you really want to go. But you still try your best to do something at home, to do your ibadah at home, and instead actually you're doing your khidmah of this unwell person, but you have that desire to go to the mosque. That every second you do that khidmah, not only are you getting the ajr of that khidmah, but inshallah Allah will also give you the reward of what you wanted to do, go to that mosque. So the story of Hazrat Uwais al-Qarani is a good example of this, where he always desired to see the Prophet ﷺ in person, but he couldn't because of his elderly mother who he looked after. But the Prophet ﷺ knew about him without ever meeting him and mentioned him specifically in his hadith, to the point where Hazrat Umar bin Khattab in his Khilafah went and seeked out Hazrat Uwais al-Qarani because he was so well renowned, without even going to Medina or ever meeting anybody. But he spent his life looking after and serving his mother. But look at the daraja that he had despite never going to Medina, never meeting the Prophet ﷺ in person. So if you have that niyyah inside you, even if that action doesn't come to fruition, you will still get that ajr. So on one side, you might have typical good deeds that everybody thinks that you get sawab for, you get ajr for, but if your niyyah is corrupted, tainted, niyyat mumtazija or niyyat qadira, then those deeds go to waste. And on the other hand, you might have normal day-to-day deeds that nobody considers, that person's doing anything special, or it might just be that person just wastes their time. They never show up to the mosque. They don't even read their extra nawafil. They always leave early. They don't do anything extra, but you don't know what their niyyah is. They don't know what their situation is. So even if you're in a difficult situation, you can turn that difficult situation into something that gives you the ajr of normal traditional ritual worship just by reforming your niyyah and your intention. So next we'll be discussing the attacks on our niyyah and what are those external sources that might try to corrupt our niyyah, and how we can be wary of them and try and protect ourselves from these external sources. So what are the aspects that corrupt our intention? So there are two aspects of the attacks on our niyyah. It is an internal aspect and an external aspect. So the internal is the nafs. It is our lower self. It's our nafs ammara. And the external is shaitan or iblis. So these whispers from the nafs and the shaitan aim to pollute our intention or undermine our pure relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these doubts and whispers will reduce our motivation to build a strong relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these whispers can turn a pure intention into an impure intention, from niyat al-safiya to niyat al-qadira. So we need to protect ourselves against these whispers in order to keep our intention pure. And in Surah An-Nas, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Min sharri al-waswas al-khannas. So say, O Prophet, I seek refuge in the Lord of humankind, the master of humankind, the God of humankind, from the evil of the lurking whisperer. So this can be our internal whispers or the external whispers. So what to bear in mind is that the whispers are a build-up. It's never a direct attack. It will never feel like, oh, something is coming to tell me to do something bad. It'll be small thoughts that will be planted in your mind. Like, it's okay, I don't need to do that, that's not important. Or that person didn't say thank you to me, why did that person not appreciate me? These small things will build up. These are whispers that come from inside or from externally from shaitan. So how does shaitan or our nafs actually try to corrupt our intention? What are the strategies? So there's three main things to keep in mind. Is that number one is that obviously they try to encourage you to commit sin. Shaitan tries to encourage you to commit sin. Number two, stops you from doing good. And the third thing is to corrupt your intention. So these are the stages or strategies of shaitan. So the number one, first thing encouraging you to commit sin is called a lesser of an attack, because the ultimate objective is to not necessarily make you commit bad deeds, but to take you to hell with him. That's the objective of shaitan. So he tailors the attacks for each individual. So when we say encouraging you to commit sin, this is the obvious method of attack. It's easier to identify and rectify something that is outwardly, that somebody can come and give you nasiha, because it is like a bad deed outwardly. Everybody knows, like if you are drinking alcohol, for example, that is something outwardly, and it's easier to rectify because it's easier to pinpoint, it's easier to identify. So the next thing is stopping you to do good acts, which is a little bit more sinister than the first, because you're not outwardly doing something bad, but you're also not doing your responsibilities, or you might be neglecting something. So maybe you're not praying, or you're heedless in your prayers. Shaitan might encourage you to do that, not to take the gravity of your faraid as much, to neglect your prayer or to neglect your other responsibilities. And the final thing is the corrupting of intention, which is the most dangerous and sinister part, because again, outwardly it's a good deed, but you're not getting any ajr or reward for it. So this is a complex method of attack, because you can make somebody who is outwardly performing so many good deeds, all of that can become nil, can become zero, just by corrupting that intention. So it is a lot easier for shaitan to target that person's intention than to encourage that person to commit bad sin, because that person's already committing good deeds. It is easier to corrupt their intention than to make them commit a bad act. So shaitan is an open enemy to us. We've been told to take him as an enemy and treat him as such, so we have to fight him and protect ourselves. This includes our nafs as well, our lower nafs. So making sure that we're aware of what thoughts are coming in our mind. Is that think that something is making you lazy, or a thought is coming in your head, oh, it's fine, I'll do that later. Is that an important thing? Did you have a good intention to do that thing? And is that thought making you lazy? Is it making you heedless? Is it making you ungrateful? These thoughts that come in your mind are seeds, and then they grow, and then they build into something more. So to be able to identify that and recognize that, oh, actually I'm not going to think like that, that's wrong, that is an attack from my nafs, that's from shaitan trying to attack my niyyah. Actively identifying that is the way to protect ourselves. And if you can realize that this is an attack or this is a wrong thought for me to have, is a really positive sign that you are able to protect yourself. So actively doing that is something that we need to do. So a task that we can do, just especially before Ramadan, this is something that is quite useful, or something that will help us clear what exactly is our plan for Ramadan and our actions. Is it just to fast, read Tarawih, read Quran, just as a habit or ritual, or are we going to do it in a more intentional planned manner in accordance to what we've just discussed? So you can practice setting your intentions. Think about your day-to-day things that you do, and what is a good intention you can have to convert that into an ibadah, and what is perhaps something you think of at that time that might actually be a negative intention. It might be a niyyah mumtazija, or maybe niyyah qadira. Maybe that's an opportunity for shaitan or your nafs to corrupt your intention there. Maybe when you're working, maybe there's a gossip culture there. That's a very good opportunity for shaitan to try and attack your intention. Maybe when you're with your friends and family, maybe when you're eating, or you might not follow the correct manners, you might be wasting food, you might be heedless in these injunctions from our deen. So just think about these day-to-day things that we do, especially for Ramadan, and think about how can you purify your niyyah, reform and remove the negative part, but also actively make that an active action of ibadah by making that a way to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the ultimate goal is to recognize Allah, become closer to Allah, and to worship Allah. So how can we make these actions an act of worship and also purify them from any other inclination that is not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And just a little bit more in detail is, of course, think about your intentions in general, but to plan a routine, a daily schedule, structured and defined by your intentions. So if you perhaps just mentally, or on a piece of paper, in a journal, or on your phone, have just a sort of rough layout of the time that you have in your day. What actions are you roughly doing during that time, and what intention can you have during that slot of your day? So when you wake up, what is your morning routine? How does those actions connect you to Allah? What is your working routine? What is your education routine? Your eating, every single thing that you do, how can you make the intention for that action make you closer to Allah, and how can you remove anything that removes you or takes you away from Allah, and how can you reform that intention at that time? So I think this is a very useful activity to do before Ramadan, especially a time where most people reform themselves. So a good time to do this is right before Ramadan, and at the end of Ramadan, before we are going into Shawwal, to make another version of that routine for your day-to-day routine outside of course, fasting, so that you can maintain the reform of your niyyah that you'll do in Ramadan, but adapt it for your new routine. So I would recommend doing this before Ramadan and right at the end before we go back into our normal routines. So right before we finish off, I would like to focus on these two nasiha from the Shadili Imam Ibn Ata'ullah Iskandari in his Kitab al-Hikam, where he compiled around 260 spiritual aphorisms or hikam, sayings on self-purification and guidelines to help strengthen the relationship between insan and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first that I thought was relevant is that actions are lifeless forms, and they are only given life by having true sincerity in them. So true khulus, or clean and pure niyyah. So a clean and pure niyyah is one with true sincerity, of course, with khulus. So niyyah safiya or niyyah khalisa is one that gives any amal life, whether that is a good amal, any righteous amal, it is lifeless until there is khulus in it, until there is a pure niyyah behind it. And then he also says later on that let not the intention of your aspiration shift to what is other than He, for one's hopes cannot outstrip the generous. So what Ta'ala here is indicating is that if you have a desire for something, let that not be an inclination away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let it be something that leads you to Allah. If you desire for something and that desire is affecting your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it means making you incline away, then of course that action is going to be lifeless. But also your hopes that you have for anything in this dunya, your expectations, if I do this, I'm going to get this. If I do this job, I'm going to get this income. If I do this degree, I'm going to get this job. I'm going to do this. You have this life plan planned out for you according to the dunya. Many things in our life we think like this. Your hopes that you have or goals that you have as a consequence of your actions, you're like, okay, I'm going to do this to achieve this. But the hopes that you have can never outstrip or never exceed the generosity, the mercy, the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you expect what you're getting as a result of your own efforts, then of course that action will not only lack barakah, but it will also affect the result. It will you will only get what you worked for. Whereas if you hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do what you can in your own power, but leave everything else to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do it only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what you get in result is a lot more than you can ever imagine. The generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond our imagination. And I'm sure many of us can think of many situations in our lives where we thought one thing would happen, but another thing happened and it led to it to being a much better situation in the long term. It led that situation to be a lot more fruitful and have much more barakah than we could have ever hoped with our own efforts. So what this is telling us is that having trust in Allah's generosity and having hope only in Allah and only expecting from Allah when we do any action and having that as a fundamental part of our niyyah is what leads us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not only our akhira but also improves our dunya. And we've seen this in our own lives. So just to keep these main sentiments in mind when Ramadan is coming and we're planning for Ramadan, and making sure that it's a lot more intentional rather than just a routine part of our year or just fasting for the sake of it, not rather than just having a cultural experience or just doing because our family's doing it, making a much more intentional experience that connects us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I hope these sentiments you keep in your mind and they lead you towards having a fruitful Ramadan, inshallah. And another intention that I think is important to keep in mind is this intention written by Imam Haddad, who would say this every time before he would teach or learn anything. So for these sessions, and of course in Ramadan, I'm sure we will actively be doing more Islamic learning or any sort of learning, in fact, whether that's our normal education or any sort of Islamic education. Making sure that we have a good intention for learning is important, especially since our next week's session will be on righteous deeds and seeking knowledge. So this is, I think, something good to end on before, as a connector to next week. Because this is Imam Haddad's intention for seeking knowledge. So before any lesson or before teaching or before learning, he would always verbally recite this intention where, of course, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, sending salawat on the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. نويت التعلم والتعليم, I intend to study and teach. وتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع, to take and give a reminder and take and give benefit, take and give advantage, to encourage the holding fast to the book of Allah and the way of his messenger upon him, be peace, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and calling to guidance and directing towards good, hoping for the countenance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his pleasure, his proximity and his reward, transcendent is he. So not only do we want our learning and teaching to be an opportunity for ourselves, but to intend that you want this to be an opportunity for you to spread that knowledge and to benefit others. So every single part of this niyyah where he's saying, Imam Haddad is saying, I intend to study and teach, his niyyah includes something for himself and something for others. And each part, Ayn had to study and teach, to take and give a reminder, take and give benefit, take and give advantage. So he's saying that if I'm receiving something from this, then I also want to give it to others. So that is part of their intention, because if you have ilm, it is only beneficial if you're spreading and sharing the ilm. So this is a very good guide to what type of intentions we should have, and how you should think about what your intention should be in every part of your life. So I think this is a good guide before we all start planning for Ramadan, which is very close. So if you keep this in mind as a guide for what good intention is before we do something, starting in the name of Allah, selling salawat, thinking about how we can use this to benefit others as well. And inshallah, Allah Ta'ala will give us a tawfiq to, inshallah, one day in all aspects of our life, to all of our actions be based on Niyyah Safia and khulus, and with the ultimate goal to become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and stay in the path of his deen, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for tuning into this week's session, and I look forward to seeing you all next week, inshallah, in session 3 on the third stage of our prophetic formula, which is on righteous deeds and seeking knowledge. So once we have purified ourselves, set our intentions, the next step is, of course, taking action, which we will discuss next week, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.